will present today a small lecture on autism and autism spectrum disorders. Recent research information. I think the person that is talking to you. So let's move into the lecture. Let's talk a little bit about epidemiology before. The prevalence of autism is about 6 autistic children per 1,000. That's the prevalence for autism spectrum disorder, which, as you will see in a moment, is now incorporated or will be incorporated in the new DSM-5 or the American Psychiatric Association, the manual of diagnostic for diagnostic disorders. And the prevalence for that is 6 per 1,000. Autism itself, the prevalence is 1 or 2 children for every 1,000 children. In terms of the Asperger syndrome, it is 0.6 per 1,000. One called childhood disintegrative disorder is 0.02 per 1,000 children. Autism tends to be more frequent in boys than in girls, and the ratio is about 4.2 per 1 girl. 4.2 boys per 1 girl. It affects 1 in 70 males and only 1 in 315 females. In those that has autism spectrum disorder and mental retardation, the ratio is 2 to 1. Females generally show less atypical behaviors, and consequently they are less likely to receive an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Finally, the Rett disorder occurs mostly in girls, it's rare in boys, and is a really devastating problem. As a manner of general introduction. Now, one thing that you need to know is that the Asperger disorder is being dropped out of the DSM-5 manual, but full details of that and other changes that are taking place will not appear until May of next year, 2013, when the new manual will be published. The DSM-5 adds the term autism spectrum disorders, which is in general use nowadays, but is now included in the manual, or will be included in the manual, and Asperger's will now too included in that category in the new manual. Some Asperger families have fear that because of that inclusion on the autism spectrum disorders, that the children may lose their educational services and benefits, but the experts really believe that will not be the case, but just the contrary. And the reason for that is that Asperger is treated differently in the different states in this country. It's not uniform. Some offer very good educational services for it and benefits, and others don't. And having been included under autism spectrum disorders, they expect that the benefits will apply in all the states in the country, and consequently it will benefit the families that have Asperger children. Now, I will read to you a summary published in Health Orbit of a paper that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association recently. And this study of twins suggests that genetic components of autism spectrum disorders may be moderate. The environmental components, on the other hand, may be substantial, which is a reversal of the previous generally accepted view. The paper that is being summarized, and of which I will give you some highlights, was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Yeah, and you have the address there. Now, after evaluating twin pairs in which at least one child has autism or autism spectrum disorder, that is ASD, researchers suggest that the shared environment may play a much more substantial role in the development of the condition that shared genes do. This is according to a report that was published online, first by the Archives of General Psychiatry, which is one of the journals of the American Medical Association. Current estimates suggest that 40 of every 10,000 children have autism, and prevalence rates for ASD are about 1%. According to background information in the article, studies of siblings have found a concordance rate, the likelihood that if one child has a disorder, others will as well, of up to 14%. The authors note that in previous studies of twins, concordance rates for autism were relatively high for identical twins, that is, monozygotic twins, but non-existent for fraternal, that is, dizygotic twins. The final analysis in this study, including 54 pairs of identical twins and 138 pairs of fraternal twins, that is 54 pairs of monozygotic twins and 138 pairs of dizygotic twins. Of these, 80 were comprised of a boy and a girl. Of these 138 pairs, 80 of them were a boy and a girl. The researchers found the likelihood of both children having autism or autism spectrum disorder was higher among identical twins than among fraternal twins. They also used modeling to estimate how much of the risk could be attributed to genetic factors. This analysis demonstrated that more than half of the variance in risk was probably explained by shared environmental factors. Notice that, because that is the substance of this particular paper. That the analysis they made demonstrated that more than half of the variance in risk was probably explained by shared environmental factors versus less than 40% of the risk owing to genetic hereditability. The results suggest that environmental factors common to twins explain about 55% of the liability to autism, is what the authors conclude. They say although genetic factors also play an important role, they are of substantially lower magnitude than estimates from prior twin studies of autism. The finding of significant influence of the shared environment, experiences that are common to both twin individuals, may be very important for future research paradigms. And this is an important and significant change in our knowledge of the causes of autism. And as you will see a little later, there is an enormous number of environmental factors that apparently might be a risk factor in developing this particular disorder in children. Now, let's discuss now the non-genetic factors that play a large role in determining autism according to the Stanford University Study Group 1 paper published in the Archives of General Psychiatry in July 4th of 2011. And again, I will read mostly from the summary that was produced by Health Orbit, that I found it very valuable. In the summary, they said the following: a new Stanford University School of Medicine study of twins suggests that non-genetic factors play an unexpectedly large role in determining autism risk, turning upside down recent assumptions about the cause of this common disabling developmental disorder. From prior studies of shared autism in twins, scientists had estimated that 90% of autism risk was attributable to genes and only 10% to non-genetic environmental factors. Compare that with what we just said a moment ago. But the new study, the largest ever of twins in which at least one in each pair has autism, shows almost the opposite. It found that genes account for 38% of autism risk, with environmental factors explaining the remaining 62%. So it's 38 versus 62% for the environmental factors. The author, or one of the authors, Joaquin Hallmeyer, said the following: "It took me a bit by surprise that heritability of autism was so much lower than previous studies calculated." He is the first author of the paper, which appeared in the July 4 issue, as I told you, of the Archives of General Psychiatry. For years, studies of non-genetic autism risk factors have focused on the idea that childhood vaccines might trigger autism, a theory that very extensive research did not support. But it still remains an open question how much time and resources to devote to other potential environmental risks and how it is that they interact with the genetic factors. Although the study does not identify specific environmental factors, they could include any non-genetic factors that seem to influence the autism risk. The children studied were 192 pairs of twins, 384 individuals, identified from a California-wide registry of children who receive services for developmental disabilities. The large size of the study and the fact that the subjects were drawn from California's entire highly diverse population means the study results are more reliable and apply more broadly than those from prior studies, which examine generally a small, homogeneous group of children in northern European countries, Hallmeyer said. The study included 54 pairs of identical twins and 138 pairs of fraternal twins, that is, dizygotic twins. At least one child from each pair had been diagnosed with full-blown autism, or at least severe form of autism spectrum disorder. The scientists conducted standardized evaluations to verify the children's diagnosis, a step that many prior studies had omitted. Children whose autism was known to be secondary to another disease were not included in this particular study. To calculate the relative contribution of genes and environment to autism risk, the researchers then examined the difference in shared autism rates between identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins share all their genes. Fraternal twins share only half of theirs, and both types of twins share most elements of their environment from conception through childhood. As the scientists expected for a disease that is partly explained by genes, the identical twins were, of course, more likely to share the autism diagnosis than the fraternal twins. Identical twins did not always share the diagnosis, hinting that non-genetic factors contribute to autism. Notice that is important, that in some cases, identical twins, that is monozygotic twins, did not always share the diagnosis, hinting that non-genetic factors contribute to autism. The surprise came, however, in the calculation of environmental contributions to the autism risk. The dizygotic, that is fraternal twins, are more similar than you will expect if you take only genetic factors into account. Holmeyer said, the higher than expected degree of similarity between fraternal twins, that is dizygotic twins, confirm that something other than genes had to be at work. In other words, the twins' shared environments help explain the shared diagnosis. So this is a very significant difference from the way we used to look at genetics in autism in the past. Demographic factors found in previous studies to be associated with autism, such, for example, as the ages of the twin parents, the years of parental education, ethnicity, difference in birth weight between the twins, and gestational age at birth, that did not impact the rate of shared diagnosis between twin individuals. They say at some point, quote, our findings suggest that events during pregnancy should be a focus for future research into the origins of autism, is what Lisa Croen, PhD, and a co-author of the study, said. So as you see, that this is a significant and important change in our views of genetics and autistic disorder. Now, the same study at the Stanford University suggested that one of many possible environmental factors causing autism might be linked to antidepressant use. And there are many other possible risk factors that I'm going to refer to. But let me first read you another summary of the Health Orbit paper on the subject of a study that seems to debunk, like the previous one, autism as a primary genetic disorder. And the summary says, a rigorous study of nearly 400 twins has shown that environmental factors have been underestimated and genetics overestimated for the roles in the autism spectrum disorders. The study found that the children's environment represents more than half of the susceptibility, that is 55% in the most severe form of autism and 58% in the broad spectrum of the disorder, while genetic is involved in 37% and 38% of the risk, respectively. This is the largest and most rigorous twin study to date to research the genetic component of this disorder. And top expertise from the University of California Institute for Human Genetics and the Stanford University, which jointly led this research, as well from the Kaiser Permanente, UC Davis, the Autism Genetic Research Exchange, and the California Department of Public Health. So as you see, it was quite a complex operation in which quite a number of different and quite respected institutes participated. Autism has been thought to be the most heritable of all neurodevelopmental disorders, with a few small twin studies suggesting a 90% link, said geneticist Neil Rush, is the director of the UCSF Institute for Human Genetics and senior author of this paper. He said, it turns out the genetic component still plays an important role, but in our study, it was overshadowed by the environmental factors shared by twins. Our work, he continues, suggests that the role of environmental factors has been underestimated. What exactly those environmental factors are? Holmeyer, one of the writers of the researchers in this study, he called it the multi-million-dollar question. But he noted that the disorder's manifestations in very young children indicates a cause early in life and possibly during the pregnancy. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a range of complex neurodevelopmental disorders characterized by social impairment, communication difficulties, and restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped behaviors, patterns of behavior, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. an estimated 6 children, as I told you earlier, of every 1,000, or 1 in 166, has some form of autism, with boys being, as I told you already, 4 times more likely than girls to have this particular disorder. That rate is roughly 10 times the prevalence of the disorder in the 60s, which has spurred a concerted effort to identify the source of the conditions. There have been such an incredible increase in the diagnosis of this type of disorder. The twin study compared those records with California birth certificates for children born between the years 1987 and 2004 and identified 2,312 twins in which at least one member was affected with some form of autism. The children were all at least 4 years old when autism can be reliably diagnosed. The initial results were quite staggering. A boy with a fraternal, not identical twin with autism spectrum disorder had a 31% chance of also having the disorder, while a boy with an identical twin, that is a monozygotic twin, with the disorder had a 77% chance of sharing it. In girls, the concordance was 50% in identical monozygotic twins and 36% for fraternal, that is, dizygotic pairs. Both rates are dramatically higher than the general population, in which the overall incidence of autism is about 0.6%. The high fraternal rate was especially unexpected, Rich said, because fraternal twins had previously been thought to have the same concordance as non-twin siblings. Identical twins share all of their genetic material, while fraternal twins, as I said a moment ago, share only half the same as any pair of siblings that are not twins. The strong fraternal twin rate in this study is considerably higher than non-twin siblings, indicating, and this is important, a strong environmental component unique to the twins. Let me repeat this. The strong fraternal twin rate in this study is considerably higher than non-twin siblings, indicating a strong environmental component which is unique to the twins. The difference between the identical, as monozygotic, and fraternal rates, dizygotic, shows that genetics definitely plays a role in the disorder. Rich said, noting that if it did not, the concordance rates would be equal among the identical and fraternal groups. But the fact that the fraternal twins have such a high rate shows that the shared environment is contributing very significantly to their susceptibility. Croin, who is the director of the Autism Research Program at Kaiser, said that the findings suggest that events during the pregnancy should be a focus for future research into the origins of this disorder. Now, I just mentioned that the same study at the Stanford University suggested that among the many possible factors in the environment causing autism might be a link to antidepressant use, which is interesting because it's not only during the pregnancy, but even apparently there is a higher risk when antidepressants have been taken even a year and before the pregnancy. Other possible risk factors are maternal gestational diabetes, maternal and paternal age over 30 years of age, bleeding after the first trimester of the pregnancy, the use of various medications during the pregnancy, and meconium in the amniotic fluid, which can be observed at birth. Babies that have been exposed to much traffic air pollution in the womb or during the first year of life are as well apparently at higher risk to develop autism. Now, the researchers are not saying that pollution causes autism, but that it is a possible risk for it. Ball and colleagues, using how close a child lives to a freeway instead of the amount of pollution in the air, compared 245 California kids that did not have autism with 279 autistic children. They found that the autistic were as close as twice as likely to have been exposed to high levels of pollution while in the womb, and about 3 times as likely to exposure to high pollution during the first year of life. As in the comparison between children with autism and not autistic children, and the one that has autism, as you see, were twice as likely to have been exposed even during their pregnancy to high levels of pollution and during the first year of life as well. But the researcher concluded categorically that though pollutants can play a role in brain development and affect brain development, it does not prove that air pollution makes children autistic, given that there are so many other variables that can be involved. For example, indoor pollution in the house itself, and secondhand smoke, and innumerable other things. Another factor that has been referred to as a possible risk is flu in pregnant women they were twice as likely to have an autistic child. Those who had a fever for a week or more during their pregnancy were 3 times as likely to have an autistic child, which leads obviously to a strong recommendation for all women to receive the flu vaccine before they are pregnant. Nevertheless, here too, you must take into account that these are potential risk factors that have been identified in the background of children that have developed autism, but we have to take into account that there are innumerable other factors involved, and not only the flu may be responsible for this outcome. Nevertheless, it should be understood that around 99% of women who had flu during their pregnancy do not have an autistic child. Though, as I just mentioned, in autistic children, it's not uncommon to find in the background that the mother may have had flu during the pregnancy. Yet there is no cause for excessive alarm, as I say here, because 99% of women who had flu during their pregnancy did not have an autistic child. Autism risk increases 70% when women are obese during their pregnancy. But again, this does not mean that every obese pregnant woman will have an autistic child. It's just a risk factor. It's found in the background of many autistic children. Families with autistic children, and this is important because it's not generally well known, need to be aware that these children tend to run away frequently, a fact that creates many tragedies and is dangerous because they frequently get hit by a car or even drown in a pool or in a pond, and accidents of that kind are not uncommon, and these children try to run frequently from their homes, and it's not the parents' fault or lack of proper care of the children. Is that it's impossible to have 24 hours every second complete and absolute control of the children's behavior. That's just not realistic. So, research important as it has been in changing factors that contribute to the risk of autism is mostly not conclusive about much of the above factors referred to. Yet, he has identified them, as I have said repeatedly, more frequently in autistic children or in children with autistic spectrum disorders. And that's the end of the lecture. If you have any questions, you can refer them to me. Here you have some information about the Carter-Jenkins Center, who we are, what we do, and to see the self-learning programs on the behavioral sciences, as well as the lectures on mental health and psychoanalysis, available free. You can visit our website at the web address given there. And as usual, your tax-free donation will certainly help the center to continue this work. Thank you very much.